Well, today we're going to do something interesting. We're discussing pluralism. Specifically with regard to pluralism, we're discussing the uniqueness of Jesus Christ. Now, how many of you guys have ever heard the term pluralism before? Just by show of hands. Okay, when we speak about pluralism, especially when we speak about it in religious terms, what we're talking about the fact that there is this huge breadth of religious ideas out there. Various religions, various faiths of all different sorts. And when we speak about pluralism in this context, as a church body, what we're talking about is how we react to the fact that there are so many faiths in the world. Now, everybody's called to react to this. It's not just for the Christian to begin thinking about whether or not their view is true. But the atheist has to react to whether or not they believe their view is true in light of all the other religious traditions that exist. The agnostic has to make sense of why there are so many different religions. So does the Hindu or the Buddhist. Everyone has to react to this and do something with the ideas that exist. Well, this is a topic that's near and dear to my heart. Many of you guys might not know this, but one of my undergraduate majors was in comparative religions. And it's one of those departments that I got into, and as soon as we began discussing all these different views, all these variant views, I just kind of fell in love with the study of religion. And so what we're going to do over the next 30 minutes is to try to break down why it is that those religions are false, and why it is that Christianity is true, the very best way to pursue life, and the most important and verified truth claim in the whole of the world religion spectrum. That's a big deal, especially in 20 minutes. I want to assure you that I have not arrived at these conclusions based on everything that I'm going to present in the next 30 minutes. Obviously, there's more to talk about than we can get to in 3 months of study, but we're just going to try to break down some of the basic issues. Well, what do we make of pluralism? The fact that there are so many religions in this world. What do we do with that? Everybody has to react to that, as I said before. And what we find is, traditionally, there are 3 different ways to react to that notion that there are so many religions. Firstly is a reaction that says, let's embrace all different religions and religious views. Anybody spent time in college recently and who's taken an introduction to religion course in the secular university, chances are you run into this view early on. Every religion is true. Every religion gets to be true. It's usually phrased something like this. All religions are superficially different, but deep down, they're all really the same. All religions are different on the surface. They might appear different at the surface, but when you get right down to it, they're all basically saying the same thing. Have you encountered this objection to Christianity in particular? You ever run into this? Some will even cite specific documents, maybe like Jesus' Sermon on the Mount, and they might compare it to the Bhagavad Gita's or say the Buddha's Four Noble Truths or His Eightfold Path, and say, see, look, ethically, don't these say very similar things? Aren't they very much alike? I would encourage you, if you do encounter this contention with the Christian faith, have some agreement right at the outset. Typically, a lot of us Christians feel like we need to fire right back at somebody when they do something that's completely against our view or say something that really kind of rubs us the wrong way. Don't do that. Always try to find a point of agreement before you disagree with someone. Just good argumentation. So somebody brings this idea to the stage. We should embrace all world religions. All world religions are inherently true. I'd like to say at the outset, you know what? I agree that there are truths in every world religion. But you can't possibly believe that every religion is true. There's a huge distinction between these two things. There are truths in every religion. I believe that's the case. All religions cannot possibly ideologically be held to be true. I like what a Christian philosopher by the name of Peter Kreeft says about this. Peter Kreeft teaches at the University of Boston, or Boston College, rather, and he said this: that is simply factually untrue. No one ever makes this claim unless he is, 1, abysmally ignorant of what the different religions of the world actually teach, or 2, intellectually irresponsible in understanding these teachings in the vaguest and wooliest way, or 3, morally irresponsible in being indifferent to them. The objector's implicit assumption is that the distinctive teachings of the world's religions are unimportant, and that the essential business of religion is not truth, but something else. Transformation of consciousness, or sharing and caring, or culture, or comfort, or something of that sort. Not conversion, but conversation. I find this is typically what people mean when they say that all world religions are true. Every religion is just the same. They're bringing in ideological baggage with them. And the baggage says this: the purpose of religion is for everybody to just have a nice feeling about themselves and have a good life. That's typically what they mean, isn't it? And we can get to that in a number of ways by just beginning to ask them, to say, what is it that you see as the objective of religion? Tell me, if you believe all religions are true, tell me, what objective do these religions all have? What are they trying to accomplish? If an individual says, well, they're trying to get to God, no, I'm sorry, you don't understand world religions. Buddhism is not making an attempt to get to God. That is not the directive of Buddhism. Atheism certainly isn't making an attempt to get to God. If they say, well, the directive is cosmic consciousness, wow, I didn't see that in my Bible. I don't remember reading about that as the goal of the Christian paradigm. Do you remember reading that anymore? I didn't get that. Yeah, Second Confucians, chapter 2. It's not in the Bible. Now, the reason that all religions can't be true goes beyond this. The reasons that we can't universally embrace all religions goes beyond simply understanding this analogy. There is in philosophy something that is called the law of non-contradiction. Everyone say, the law of non-contradiction.
The law of non-contradiction.
I knew that you could. That was brilliant. The law of non-contradiction. Let me first read it to you in Socrates' words, as it's recorded in Plato's Republic. Socrates says this: it's plain the same thing won't be willing at the same time to do or suffer opposites with respect to the same part and the same relation to the same thing.
Why did you have to read that?
Yeah, does everybody get that? Thanks for clearing that up, Socrates. This is why the Greeks have to be thought through a lot. Let me try to explain this in more practical terms. Let's assume that somebody comes up to my wife and I as we're in the foyer on a Sunday morning. And they say, then Lisa, I understand that you were expecting a child. And my wife says, yes, and I say, no. Do you just go, mm-hmm, and walk away? Or do you walk away going, whoa, what was going on there? Either she didn't tell him, or they need to get counseling, or something is going on. But you don't just accept that as, oh, well, she is and she isn't. Something cannot be both true and false at the same time. I cannot be both Ben and not Ben at the same time. This cannot be both microphone and not microphone at the same time. What this breaks down to in terms of religious views, what this means for us is that there cannot be both a God and no God at the same time. There can't be both God and no God at the same time. There cannot be a pantheon of 330 million deities and also no deities at the same time. One of those things must be true. They can't both be true. They might both be false, but they cannot both be true. When it comes down to world religions, then, what this means for us is that Islam can't be true if Hinduism is true. Buddhism can't be true if Christianity is true. And there are some sectors of religion, for instance, Baha'i or some of the universalist faiths, that actually believe that every view is just, it's all one view. Ultimately, it all gets us to the same thing. But a Muslim does not accept that. A Muslim would not look at that view, the universalist view, and say, oh, well, you're just giving your perspective of things. They would say, no, you're perverting my religion beyond what it was intended to be. Not all religions can be true. All religions could be false, but not all religions can be true. Generally, when you hear these objections, though, they don't occur in a philosophical vantage. It's not when people are coming up to you and saying, I believe that all religions are inherently true. Usually they drop the analogy bombs on you. The analogy bombs. And what I mean by analogy bombs are these. Have you ever heard some of these? Faiths are like a great mountain. And there's this mountain that is the truth in the world, and all of these paths run up the mountain to its peak. And the paths are like the various different religions. We're all on a path. And we'll all get to the top of the mountain one day. We're all headed to the same place. You heard this stuff? Maybe you've heard this one. This one's great. 5 blind men. 5 blind men are touching an elephant. Okay, so they walk up to an elephant, and one pushes against its side and says, I have found a wall. And another one grabs the leg of the elephant and says, no, no, it's a tree. And another one grabs the tail of the elephant and says, no, it's a rope. And one grabs the trunk and says, it's a vine. And one touches the ear and says, it's a fan. All different views. They're all touching the same thing. They're all touching on the same truth, but none of them really get it. And so this is used to describe religions. That's just the way religions are. We've got to defuse the analogy bombs. The analogies don't really work once you think critically. Now, for a freshman who is stepping into a college university, and they're stepping into a religion course at the same time, that blows their mind. I mean, some of them are just like, wow, I've never thought of it that way. Here I was confused and thinking all of these world religions are offering me different ideas that I've got to sort through. But now I know I don't have to sort through them because they're really all just one thing. And so it simplifies it for everybody, right? You can see why people would want to buy into this, right? I can. Let's blow these apart, shall we? If somebody gives you the mountain analogy, where all paths leading up one mountain, ask them, what's at the top of the mountain? What could possibly be at the top of the mountain? Now, this is a good question. Most people will stop at this point and go, well, I don't know that. I guess none of us really know that. We'll just know when we get there. Well, if you're going to make an analogy like that, if you're going to say that all of religion ultimately has the same goal, it's all going to accomplish the same end, you better know what that end is. You better have some idea of what that end might be. And generally, like we were saying before, what they typically mean is all religion's there to help us have a better life. It's to make us a better person and give us a better approach to existence. In my study of world religions, I have not found a single religion that says its sole purpose in existence is to make people have a better life. That might happen along the way. But religious ideologies are cosmologies. They describe the universe. They're meta-narratives. They describe the way the whole system of life and existence functions. That's what a religion ultimately is. It's a shot at truth. It's trying to get to truth. Not simply a practical way of approaching life. The mountain analogy falls apart, especially in regards to the fact that if we're saying that maybe God is at the top of the mountain, then we've got to say that some of those paths don't lead up the mountain or lead into an avalanche or lead down the mountain. And it is fully possible that there is only one path that actually gets up the mountain. This analogy does break down and fall apart. What about the lion and the elephants? You guys heard that one, by the way? Yeah, that was, I think, first day in a religion course at Miami. I think I got that one. 5 blind men touching an elephant. Here's where this analogy breaks down. Ask the question, what are they touching? Well, what are they touching? An elephant. How do you know? See, the narrator knew, didn't they? The narrator knows that they're touching an elephant. And what this person, let's just be very clear, what this individual is saying is that every world religion is like a blind man who just doesn't get it. But you know who does get it? The person telling the analogy. How incredibly arrogant to just go, oh, by the way, all the world's religions, they all boil down to a whole bunch of blind people trying to figure out what everything's about. They're all saying variant things, and aren't they trying, and aren't they just so good to give it a shot? And the handicapped religions of the world. Meanwhile, I in my brilliance have put together the fact that while all of them are mistaken, I name the elephant and I say, this is what reality is. How terribly arrogant. Now when you break it down for most people like that, they tend to back away from that position and go, oh, well, I don't necessarily believe that. One approach, as we've said, is to embrace all religions. Another approach is to reject all religions. And I'd say we see this at least as much. You might have heard it voiced in this fashion. There's so many faiths saying so many different things. It's really arrogant to think that we might be able to determine which one of them might be true. So many faiths out there, so many different belief systems out there saying so many different things. Isn't it arrogant or presumptuous to think that one of them might be true, or that we might know that one of them is true? Well, again, first of all, let's start out with agreement. If we're talking about religions, and we're saying that all religions are man-made, then I agree completely. If all religion is man-made, then who am I to say that my faith is better than another faith? If all religions come from human beings, then who would we be to say this one is superior to this one? However, if there is a faith that is given by God, if there's a faith that comes to us from the infinite God, how arrogant to think that any of us should say, because there's a multitude of them, we cannot possibly know. In fact, wouldn't it be humble if there was a religion given by God, if there was a faith given by God, wouldn't it be humble to set aside all the other paths that are out there and say, I cannot do it on my own. My only means of accessing this God and this truth are by taking your path. And isn't that ultimately what Christianity says? Now, I don't think the notion that we can reject all religions because many of them claim truth and claim it falsely, I don't think that notion holds water at all. And let me just use an illustration, actually using water. Let's imagine I have 3 mason jars up here on the stage, and they're all labeled potable water. What's potable water?
Drinkable.
Yeah, drinkable, right? You can drink this water. Potable water. 3 jars, all up here on the stage, all labeled potable water. The only problem is one of them is true, and the others have wood alcohol in them, which is going to make you sick and kill you. Okay? 3 mason jars, all labeled water. Now, would we be right in looking at those and saying, none of those can possibly be water, because some of those are not truthful? No, that's absurd. Of course one could possibly be water. In fact, if we were very critical with our approach to it, if we, say, looked at texture, smelled, maybe felt it or looked for color distortion or applied fire to it, we might be able to understand which of these is in fact wood alcohol and which of these is in fact water. And we could discern, maybe we could even watch other people go up and try to take a drink and determine which one's water versus wood alcohol. Right? If we're being careful about it, if we're judging carefully, then we could certainly make that type of a conclusion, correct? The analogy of water holds true. We can't universally reject all faith just because some of them are definitely not telling the truth. And I find when people bring out this challenge from pluralism, that usually they're bringing it out under false assumptions to begin with. You see, think about how many churches you pass on your way to work every morning. Think about how many you go past, all these various churches. And those of us who are driving cars and looking at that type of thing think, my goodness, there are a lot of different churches around. And if you're not a Christian, think of how that must be perceived. Look at all the various churches. And then think of not just these churches in our area, but think of all the different religions and different cultures. I mean, after all, we're in America where Christianity is prevalent. There are certainly other cultures where Christianity is not prevalent. What about over in East Asia or in China or in Northern Africa? What about all of these things? And so people are rightly overwhelmed. They just look around at the world scene and think, how can I possibly be expected to judge between these things? How can I possibly be expected to discern whether or not all these religions are true? And so they just say, forget it. I'm not going to. Nobody could possibly claim to know truth. I find that that's often just a misconception of what religions are in general. When it comes down to it, there are really only about 5 or 6 religious ideologies that are competing in the world today. Now, you know there's a lot more religions than that. But they all fall into basic categories. For instance, monotheism. What's monotheism? One God. Monotheist beliefs would be what? Which ones? Judaism? Christianity? Islam? Baha'i claims to be monotheist. I think they're universalists, but yeah, so you've got only a few that are represented there. Do you know what percentage of the world's populace are represented by monotheists? Over 50%. You're looking upward towards 60% of the world's populace. 1 out of 2 people that you meet on the face of this planet believes there is a God. Now, of that number, this is even more significant. Do you know what percentage of the world's populace Christianity represents? 33%. 1 out of every 3 people you meet on the face of this planet are likely to be Christian. Call themselves Christian. Believe that Christ is the revelation of this one God. 1 out of 3. It's a pretty big deal. Islam represents a little bit more than 20% of the world's populace. But with regard to monotheism, if we're looking at the planet as a whole, monotheism represents the vast majority of beliefs that are held on this planet. Secondary to monotheism are the Eastern pantheistic monisms. Eastern pantheistic monisms. Now, as high schoolers, we've recently been talking about this as we've done a survey of worldviews. Eastern pantheistic monists. High schoolers want to tell everybody what that means? Anybody? Go ahead, let's hear it. Eastern pantheistic monism. Come on!
All is God and God is one, or something like that.
Very good. Eastern says it's from the East. Pantheism means all is God. Monism means all is one. All is God. All is one. And the pantheistic monisms religiously are comprised of what groups? You know? Buddhism and Hinduism. Okay? Buddhism actually only represents about 5.5% of the world's populace. Hinduism represents about 13% of the world's populace. Hinduism, by the way, is described almost exclusively in terms of the people who live in India. If you live in India, you're generally considered to be Hindu. Or at least they tend to calculate it as such. Okay? So you have the Eastern pantheistic monisms. All is God, all is one. And when they say God, do they mean God like we mean God? No. What they're saying when they say God is they're talking about everything taken together as a whole. The God nature, Brahman, as the Hindus would describe it. from the one God nature, the spirit nature of the whole of the cosmos. Okay? All is God, all is one. It's Buddhism and Hinduism. Other than that, then we start to just degenerate and go to smaller and smaller subsets of groups that have beliefs. For instance, animisms, tribal religions. These are people who believe that there's a spirit within like everything. So there's a spirit of the tree, a spirit of the river, a spirit of the car, whatever. You've got kind of spiritual significance to these things. Okay? Then other than animism, you've got New Age ideologies. If you're familiar with New Age ideologies, a lot of the Age of Aquarius, crystal use, a lot of mystical experiences, a lot of LSD use. Huzzah. So that's some of the New Age ideologies that are out there. They're really small. We're talking about like 1 or 2% of the world's populace with the rest of these ideas, these belief systems that are out there. So when it comes down to it, we're really talking about, first of all, can there be a God, if there's one God, or is there a God nature? And really we're breaking it down to just a few religious types, a few religious ideologies. Our first approach was to embrace all religions. I think we need to reject that on an ideological basis, logical basis, just straight down the line. The secondary ideology was to reject them all, to just get rid of them out of hand, and I think that's just biased and absurd. Nobody needs to do that. The third option is to make a critical analysis of these things to try to determine the truth or the falsehood of individual faiths. And I think that's where we as Christians have to step in. And if you are a believer in Christ, I think you've got an impetus from the living God to actually know what other views say and know why we don't adhere to those views. I'll just give you a few points of study that help you determine whether or not what you believe is true, help you determine whether or not the religions you're studying might be true or false. Is the view internally coherent? Is the view that you're studying internally coherent? I have a rejection of Buddhism based on this criterion. Is the view internally coherent? Does it meet up with its own standards? Does it make sense within itself? Buddhism says that there is a cycle of rebirth that goes on. You and I are reborn over and over again, and yet Buddhism also says that there is no eternal self, no enduring self. So the question should arise, what gets reborn? The answer? Fruit does not grow on that tree. That's not a fruitful question. That's typically the response you get. What is reborn? There's no enduring self. If I don't have a soul or something that passes on, what is reborn? It's an unfruitful question. In my studies of Buddhism, I ran into that's an unfruitful question a lot of times. Does it make sense within itself? Is it internally coherent? Is this view consistent? That is, does this view change over time? Or is this view one that has persisted and stayed the same over long spans of time? I find, again, Buddhism, Hinduism, as far as consistency goes, you can count on them to be inconsistent pretty much straight down the pike. Gandhi was a good Hindu, right? So was the man who shot Gandhi. That's Hinduism. Something can be both true and false in that system, according to that system's own paradigm. When Gandhi was shot, apparently he raised his hand to the individual who shot him, signifying kind of a sense of peace that, hey, we're both doing our own type of thing, as the story goes. We're all kind of in this together and doing our own type of thing. Hindus have groups like the Samsara Mochanas. Now, if you've read your book this past week, they said Hindus don't like killing animals. That's not entirely correct. The Samsara Mochanas are a group of Hindus that intentionally seek out little animals to crush and destroy. That's part of their religious tradition. They're freeing them. Go to your next life. They liberate all the little animals. And within that same subsector, then you have the Jains and others who won't even take antibiotics because they don't want to kill small creatures within themselves. That would be wrong. Okay, so you're looking for a consistency within the system. You're looking for pragmatism within the system. Does this religious view work? Does it seem to work and be functional? And I wouldn't talk about just individual pragmatism because everybody's going to say that their religion works for them individually. The Satanist can say my religion works for me as a person and individually. I enjoy living for myself and rebelling against everything I encounter. It might work for you personally. New Age adherent might say, I enjoy LSD. My religion works for me. That doesn't mean that it's working on a grand scale. What I'm looking for here, what I think we need to look for here, is whether or not these religious ideologies really change, not just individual lives, but entire cultures. Where do you see the most hospitals built, and by which group? Generally, it's Christianity, right? What about the universities and higher learning? Christianity. Look at the foundation of most of the major universities in this country. a Christian foundation. Most of them were founded because of that. Does it help whole cultures to survive and thrive? Does it help science to propagate? You know, we talked about this in weeks previous. Is this religion conducive toward critical thought? Or does this religion try to repress thought? Those are some considerations that we need to have as we approach these things. Are these views scientifically tenable? Once again, I reject Buddhism along these lines and Hinduism along these lines. They're not scientifically tenable, in my opinion, according to the most recent astrophysics. For any of you guys who were in my class last week, we talked about different possibilities for the cosmos and talked about how Hinduism and Buddhism hold to the oscillating universe model of the cosmos. That the universe is forever expanding and contracting and expanding and contracting. Well, that's been an ideology rejected since the 1970s. No astrophysicist now holds to that view. But Buddhists and Hindus must. They haven't quite caught up on a lot of these issues. Okay. What does this position say I need to be saved from? What does this position say I need to be saved by? And what does this position say I need to be saved to? This is, in religious circles, what we call soteriology. It's a salvation principle. What am I being saved from? What am I being saved by? And what am I being saved to? And this should be a major consideration of all of ours as we're investigating world religions and cultures. What are the Buddhists being saved from? Do you know? Self? Kind of?
Suffering.
It's the suffering, yeah. It's the cycle of rebirth, samsara, the continual cycle of rebirth and suffering. And so the Buddhists, the goal of Buddhism is nirvana, the escape. It's like a candle being blown out is the way Buddhist monks describe it. Like a candle being blown out. What is nirvana like, you might ask them? And they would say, I cannot tell you this. I can tell you what it's not. It is not life. It is not breath. It is not suffering. It is not light. It's none of these things. When it comes right down to it, the goal, the objective of Buddhism is nothing. It's escape from all that actually is. Escape from the realm of suffering. Being saved from the realm of suffering, we're being saved by enlightenment, which just kind of happens. And we're being saved to nothing. Good stuff. What about within Christianity? What are we being saved from? Sins. What are we being saved by? Jesus Christ. What are we being saved to? Eternal life with the infinite God. Okay? So very distinct ideas. Those cannot be meshed. You can't say both Buddhism and Christianity. Very distinct ideas at their core. These things are vastly different from one another. Let's say also, I would look for in a true religion, I would look for a faith that is entirely different than every other faith that I've encountered. I don't think it's too much to expect a faith to be extraordinarily unique. And really, this is why I think Christianity is the superior faith. Some of you guys might get like an inkling when we say Christianity is superior faith. Oh man, that makes me uncomfortable. Wouldn't that make people outside of Christianity uncomfortable? If I didn't believe that Christianity was a superior belief system, I wouldn't be a Christian. That should strike you as absurd, that people would expect us to not think that Christianity is superior, which is one among the many. Let me tell you about several, we'll go through four things. There are, and as I sat down to try to hash all this out, there are probably 100 reasons why I think Christianity is unique and completely different than other systems that are out there. I've narrowed it down to just four that I want to discuss very quickly. First of all, Christianity is the perfect balance of simplicity and complexity. It's the perfect balance of simplicity and complexity. And I mean by that I can explain Christianity. I can explain the core of what Christianity is and does to my 4-year-old son, and he can get it. If the objective of this life was to know truth, then I think that's the kind of thing we should be looking for. That's the kind of thing that I would expect to be implicit in this life, in this world system. By the same merit, while I can explain to my 4-year-old son and he can get it, I will never, in my lifetime, plumb all the depths of spirituality within Christianity that is there to be offered to me. If I study every day from here till I head to eternity, I'm still not going to get it all. It is wonderfully deep. Rabbi Zacharias describes this as the perpetual sense of wonder. That there is this God who is just constantly creating and doing new things, and who we're finding new facets of, and more understanding concerning. It's really an incredible thing. A perpetual sense of wonder. We have the perfect balance of simplicity and complexity. I would say to that end as well, look for a faith that is not exhaustively understood. A Faith is not exhaustively understood. That is, we don't know everything about the faith. Why would that be something we need to pursue? After all, isn't Ben kind of big on apologetics and knowing why you believe what you believe? There are faiths that are out there that I think you can have a complete understanding of. I think Islam is one of these. You can get a really good sense of where Islam stands on every single position. And the reason I say that's something maybe to be avoided is because if a man can get a comprehensive understanding of a religious ideology, chances are it's framed up in the mind of man. You understand? Christianity offers things at the outset, like a God who says, in response to, what's your name? Tell them I am sent you. You don't get a name. You don't get to call me by a name. How can we represent him as an image? Don't ever represent me as an image. I am not like humanity that can be represented as an image. In fact, don't even think that I can fit your temple. Heaven and earth cannot contain me, how much less this house you've got here. This is a God who is invisible. This is a God who is eternal, who defies all the parameters we try to throw at him. And there's something really significant in that. It goes beyond the human experience. It's bigger than you and me. Christianity is also challenging to live out. I like Rich Mullen's view along these lines. The Rich Mullen song, there's one that says, Lord, it's hard to be like Jesus. I like that we're not just given a set of rules. There's something really cool about following a Christ where I'm supposed to look at an individual and how he lived life and go, that's what I'm walking. That's what I'm trying to accomplish. I'm walking and following the path of this man. I'm trying to be like this man. This is how God wants me to live. It's really quite cool. All right, Christianity soteriology. This drastically separates Christianity from every other world culture and religious faith. In Christianity, we are saved not by what we do. There's no amount of works that we can possibly accomplish. We are saved by what God has already done. Every other faith that is out there is a procedure. If I want to become enlightened, I become a bodhisattva, I begin to engage in systematic meditation and fasting. And I try to reach that point where I have reached enlightenment and can now not be reborn again. And there are a whole set of directives as to how this is to be accomplished. If I'm going to be a Muslim, I know how many times I need to pray every day. I know my objectives as far as prayer goes. I know what God expects from me. The fasting, the recitation, the Shaddah. All of these things God expects me to do. And they're narrowed down into a little set of a grouping of things that you've got to accomplish. Within Christianity, and this is cool, I see one empirically verified thing at the outset. I am not good enough. First message of Christianity, you're not good enough. You can't do this on your own. And once you acknowledge that, here's the core of the Christian message for salvation. You appeal to God and say, I cannot do this on my own, and then your spiritual objective is to step aside and let him do it. Nothing exists like that in the whole rest of world cultures. There's no grace in other systems. Islam does not have a notion of grace like Christianity does. God cannot even be said to love in Islam. He can be said to be just. He'll react rightly to what you do or don't do. He's not going to judge you unfairly. But he certainly doesn't have any grace. He certainly doesn't love to the point of extending himself toward you in the way we see in the Christian faith. Moreover, Christianity is the only religious faith where salvation is assured. This is huge. It is the only faith in the world where salvation is utterly and completely assured. In Islam, Muhammad, in the Hadith literature, is said to have said this, by Allah, though I am an apostle of Allah, yet I do not know what Allah will do to me. Muhammad did not know whether or not he would go to heaven or hell. The central figure of Islam did not know whether or not he was saved or not saved. That's a prophet. Within Christianity, contrasted to Romans 10:9, if you confess with your mouth Jesus is Lord, believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead, you will be saved. You will be saved. It's not a hypothetical. It's not like you might be saved or you've got a good chance. There is an assurance because it's not based on what you do. It's based on what God did. And because he has done the work for us in salvation, all we do is step in his grace and experience him like a loving father. That embrace of the loving Father where the curtain of all human history opens up and we see the purpose of our existence. We see what we were created for and what we were intended to be. There on that person, on that cross. This brings me to my final point. Oh, this is my final point. This is my third point. The central figure of Christianity. And here I think this is This is, again, something that separates Christianity from every other world faith in a way that cannot be reconciled. You can't say these two things are mentioned. Jesus Christ is different from every religious figure who's ever existed. There's no one even close. No one even similar in regard to this man's life. I like the way Rabbi Zacharias talks about it. He says, the magnificent figure of Jesus Christ towers over all of human history. Think about one person in the whole course of human history who has changed the way culture works, the way individuals work. One person. It's got to be Jesus Christ. He has altered human history more than anyone else. His claims are completely unique. Nobody else claimed to be God incarnate. Jesus Christ, as his claim as God incarnate, you can't find this in other pagan sources. You can't find this in Jewish sources. This is something that is original in the person of Christ, and something that is distinct in his nature. He had the claim to have the power to forgive sin. His claims were backed up with miracles. This is a huge deal, especially as it relates to like Islam. Islam claims one miracle. One miracle in all of Islam. Do you know what it is? The Quran. That's the one miracle in Islam. And the only way you can know that the Quran is a miracle is if you read Arabic. Because if you read it in English, you don't get the miracle. Read it in Arabic, miracle. So basically relegated it down to this little demographic of people who speak Arabic. Those are the ones who can perceive the miracle. The rest of us, unless you're a great scholar and can really come to understand the language, the rest of us just can't get it. The one miracle of Islam is the Quran, which, by the way, has errors throughout it. I'll get into that in my class session afterward. However, Christianity, we have just a plethora of miracles that attest to the nature of who Jesus Christ claimed to be. It would be one thing for somebody to show up into a church setting and say, I'm the Son of God. Everybody would be like, get him out. It's quite another thing if he walks in and goes, you've been lame from birth. Stand up and walk. I'm the Son of God. That changes the whole perspective. You've got to explain the emergence of the church. You've got to explain the belief of the disciples and those who first began to follow Jesus. And the only way to really do this is in terms of the miracles that began to transpire. As we've seen in the weeks past, we've got very good evidence that those miracles actually took place. Not only were his works attested to by miracles, but he speaks with the authority of God, not as a teacher, but as God. And again, this differentiates him from other religious leaders. Did Buddha speak as Lord? No, the Buddha did not speak as Lord. The Buddha spoke as a teacher. He was giving prescriptions as to what people should do, what way they should act. Muhammad did not speak as Lord. He's certainly not considered a god among Muslims. Muhammad spoke as a teacher, as a prophet who was conveying God's word, but certainly not as God. Jesus Christ came onto the scene with an unprecedented authority to tell people what God wanted them to do as God. He spoke as Lord. Again, a major differentiation between Christianity and other world religions. All right. Lastly, I would say Christianity is different from the rest of world religions in its practicality. Christianity is intellectually fulfilling. I love that this faith says not just to believe, but investigate belief. Know why you believe. Think it through. Think it out. You know, in Islam, I as a Christian cannot critique the Quran. I'm not supposed to be able to critique the Quran. In some places in the world, if I were to critique the Quran, I'd probably find myself dead. I'm allowed to investigate and critique the Scripture. I'm allowed to discern whether or not these things are true. Within Buddhism, try to question Buddhism and the veracity of Buddhism. What do you get? It's not a fruitful question. Christianity allows room for investigation. It's intellectually fulfilling. As we've seen, hopefully we've been seeing the weeks past as we've been going through this book, it's very intellectually fulfilling. The depths there are really powerful. It's emotionally fulfilling. As a human being, I can be loved by God. Anybody need love right now? Who wants love? It is good to be loved. It's good to be loved among other human beings. But there's something really cool about being loved by God. William Lane Craig talks about his own conversion experience. And this is that huge intellect, that brilliant guy we've been studying in weeks past. You've heard him probably mentioned every week. We were listening to him speak here in Cincinnati when he was in town doing a conference. And struck, again, by his testimony. He gets up to talk about his own life. He says, when I was a young man, I was not raised in a believing household. My parents were atheists. And so I started seeking out God on my own. And I found a whole lot of hypocrisy in the church. And I was broken up as a human being. And I hated myself. And I hated other people. And he said, I don't know if you can understand this, but that bitterness, that hatred of yourself and other people can just eat you up. And so he says, one day I go in and I sit down in one of my classes, And he says, this girl sits in front of me, and she's one of these people that's always just so happy all the time, and it just makes you sick. She sits down, and he looks at her and says, Sandy, what are you always so happy about anyway? And she turns around and says, well, Bill, I'm saved. He's like, well, what's that mean? And she says, I know Jesus Christ. He's the Lord of my heart. He says, well, I go to church. And she's like, it's not the same thing. You've got to really have a relationship with this God. And so he says, well, why would Jesus want to do that for? Why would he want to live in my heart? And she says, because he loves you, Bill. And he says it hit him like a ton of bricks. He could not love himself. And he wanted so desperately to be loved by others. And the thought, when it hit him, that he was loved, not just by another human being, but who was he loved by? The infinite God. He said he just couldn't let that idea go. And so one fall night, one fall evening, he walks outside of his house, and he says, it's one of those nights where you can just see the Milky Way from horizon to horizon. And he looks up and he just says, God, I have come to know God. And he gives his life to Jesus Christ at that stage of the game. This is the God we serve. This is the salvation we've been called to. It's love. It meets out my innermost human need. It gives me significance in everything that I do. It gives me personal contentment. There's nothing like looking around at your circumstances and going, it's just here for today. I know I've got an eternity coming down the pike. I'm going to spend eternity with God. There's something really cool about going, the worst thing that can happen to me today is I die and end up with my Savior in eternity and bliss with Him and joyous reunion with my God.
Amen.
Right on? Christianity is relationally fulfilling, it's communally fulfilling, it does wonderful things as a body of believers. And we could go on and on. I simply don't have time. We've been on time for a long time, haven't we? Sorry. Hey, let's